This is furious HOA Karen's. She called it community property, and I called it stealing. Karen shouted that I could either pay for the missing item or face a hearing and a suspension. I stood on my porch in Charlotte, North Carolina, holding a torn mailer in one hand and my phone in the other, trying to figure out how a Tuesday morning had turned into a full-blown accusation of theft. Tracy Benson, the Granite Falls Property Owners Association security vendor point of contact, was 3 feet from my face, red ponytail swinging, keys jangling on her belt like she was about to cuff me herself. "You are about to get another email," she yelled, jabbing her finger toward my chest. "And if you do not respond within 24 hours, I am forwarding this to the board and recommending immediate suspension of all amenities access." I looked past her and saw my neighbor 2 doors down slow-walking his recycling bin to the curb, clearly eavesdropping. Tracy had parked her car at an angle that blocked half my driveway, tan blazer buttoned tight, a laminated policy sheet in her other hand that she waved like a warrant. I am a sales rep. I drive all day covering accounts from Charlotte to Gastonia, and the last thing I need is my HOA turning my own neighborhood into a war zone. Tracy did not care. She claimed a locked cash box had disappeared from the charity table in the clubhouse lobby 3 nights earlier, and because I had walked past that table on my way to pick up a package from the mailroom, I was now suspect number 1. I asked her what evidence she had, and she said she already submitted everything, but when I checked the portal that morning, there was nothing. No complaint, no incident report, no witness statement, just a blank screen and a new fine sitting in my account dashboard like it had always been there. The fine was $200, labeled as restitution pending investigation, and the note said failure to resolve within 7 days would result in amenities suspension and referral to outside collections. I told Tracy I did not take any cash box. She smirked and said, "You do not get special treatment." That was her favorite line. She had been using it on residents for months, always delivered with that same tight smile, as if being treated like a human being was some kind of unreasonable luxury. I asked her to show me the complaint she claimed she filed, and she pulled out her phone, tapped a few times, then shook her head and said the portal was glitching. I told her I would be happy to cooperate once I saw an actual report, and she snapped that I could either pay for the missing item or face a hearing and a suspension. She said it again, slower this time, like I was too stupid to understand English. I felt my jaw tighten, but I kept my voice calm. I said I wanted to see the incident file and any evidence she had. She laughed, an ugly bark of a sound, and said the evidence was already logged and that I was wasting her time. Tracy turned and walked back to her car, heels clicking hard on the driveway concrete, and before she got in, she turned and said, "I can make this official with 1 phone call." Then she drove off, tires squealing just a little, and I stood there holding a torn mailer that had nothing to do with any of this, wondering how I had become the villain in a story I did not even know was happening. The mailer was mine, a replacement credit card that had arrived 3 days late, and I had picked it up from the package shelf in the clubhouse. That was it. I walked in, grabbed my envelope, walked out. No cash box, no charity table drama, no interaction with anyone. But now I was on the hook for $200 and facing suspension from the pool, the gym, and the gate fob system if I did not pay up or prove my innocence in less than a week. I went inside and pulled up the Granite Falls POA portal on my laptop. The association ran this place like a small city, complete with a management office on site, a rotating cast of part-time staff, and a dizzying stack of rules that seemed to expand every month. The neighborhood itself was clean, the streets were wide, the amenities were decent, but the enforcement was a nightmare. Tracy Benson was not on the board, but she acted like she was. Her official title was Security Vendor Point of Contact, which meant she was the liaison between the HOA and the private security company that patrolled the neighborhood 3 times a week. In practice, it meant she had access to gate logs, camera footage, and incident reports, and she used that access like a weapon. If Tracy did not like you, your life got complicated fast. I checked my email. Nothing. I checked the portal complaint section. Still blank. I scrolled through my transaction history and found the $200 restitution charge posted 2 hours earlier with no attached documentation. I took a screenshot and saved it. Then I opened a new browser tab and searched for North Carolina HOA dispute procedures. I was not a lawyer, but I knew enough to understand that an HOA could not just fine you without proper notice and an opportunity to respond. The problem was that Tracy had figured out how to game the system. She would file vague complaints, label them as resolved or pending, and then use verbal threats to pressure people into paying before they even knew what they were being accused of. By the time you figured out the paperwork did not exist, she had already moved on to the next enforcement action. I called the management office. The receptionist, a woman named Angela who always sounded exhausted, picked up on the fourth ring. I explained the situation, and she sighed and said she would check the file. I heard keyboard clicking, a long pause. Then she said there was no active complaint under my name or unit number. I asked about the restitution charge, and she said it showed up in the system, but there was no incident report attached. She said Tracy had filed something earlier that week, but it was marked resolved, so the system had archived it automatically. I asked if she could pull the archived file, and she said she would have to get manager approval, and the manager was out until Thursday. I asked what I was supposed to do about the charge, and she said I could submit a dispute form, but disputes took 10 business days to process, and if the charge was not cleared by the deadline, the suspension would trigger anyway. I hung up and stared at the ceiling. I was being squeezed from both sides, a classic HOA pressure play. Pay now and admit guilt, or fight it and risk losing access to everything while the dispute crawled through a system designed to make you give up. I did not have $200 to throw away on a lie, and I definitely could not afford to have my gate fob deactivated. I worked long hours, I got home late, and if I could not get through the gate, I would have to park on the street and walk a quarter mile in the dark every night. That might not sound like much, but after the year I had just survived, every small indignity felt like a shove toward the edge. I had been rebuilding my finances after a bad year, medical bills and a car repair that wiped out my emergency fund, and I was finally getting my head above water. This was exactly the kind of garbage I could not absorb. I decided to go back to the clubhouse and look around. If Tracy was running a con, there had to be evidence. People do not just vanish cash boxes and frame randos without leaving a trail. I grabbed my jacket, my phone, and a manila folder I kept for exactly this kind of situation. The kind that bulged with printed emails, screenshots, and notes from previous HOA encounters. I had been dealing with Tracy's tactics for 6 months, ever since she took over the security liaison role, and I had learned to document everything. Every email, every conversation, every notice that showed up taped to my door, I saved it all. It had started small. A warning about my trash can being out past pickup time. A note about my car being parked crooked. A complaint that my porch light was too bright. Each one was phrased like a friendly reminder, but they kept coming, week after week, always from Tracy, always with that same condescending tone. The clubhouse was a 10-minute walk from my unit, a low brick building with a gym, a meeting room, a kitchenette, and a mail room that doubled as the package pickup area. The charity table sat in the main lobby, a folding table with a handwritten sign that said "Donations welcome. All proceeds go to local school supply drive." The table had been there for about 2 months, and I had dropped a few dollars in the box myself a couple of times. It was one of those clear acrylic lock boxes with a slot on top, the kind you see at checkout counters. The last time I had seen it, maybe a week ago, it had looked about half full crumpled bills and a few coins visible through the plastic. Now the table was bare except for a stack of identical letters in matching envelopes, no readable text, just the HOA logo printed on the front. I picked up one of the envelopes and flipped it over. It was sealed. I set it back down. The mailroom was through a door to the left, a narrow space with metal shelves and a counter where staff sorted packages. I walked in and saw Angela at the desk, sorting a pile of padded mailers. She looked up and recognized me, and her expression went carefully neutral. I asked if she had been working the day the cash box disappeared, and she shook her head. She said she had been off that day, and when she came back the next morning, Tracy had already filed a report and started calling people. I asked if there was any security footage of the lobby, and Angela hesitated, then said there was a camera, but Tracy controlled the access. I asked if I could request a copy of the footage, and she said I would have to submit a formal request to the board, and those took 2 weeks minimum. I thanked her and went back to the lobby. I stood where the charity table was and looked up. The camera was mounted in the corner near the ceiling, a small black dome that covered the entrance, the mailroom door, and the table itself. If someone had taken the cash box, the camera would have caught it. The problem was getting my hands on that footage without going through Tracy, which was obviously not going to happen. I pulled out my phone and opened the neighborhood Facebook group, a semi-official page where residents posted complaints, event announcements, and the occasional lost pet notice. I scrolled back 3 days and found a post from Tracy. It was short and vague. Reminder: all residents are responsible for following community guidelines and respecting shared property. Recent incidents have been reported and are under investigation. If you have information, please contact HOA Security Liaison immediately. No specifics, no mention of a theft, just a cloud of accusation hanging over everyone. I screenshotted the post and kept scrolling. 2 days earlier, someone named Greg Lindholm had commented asking what incidents Tracy was talking about, and she had replied, "I am not at liberty to discuss details publicly, but rest assured we are taking this very seriously." Greg was the guy who ran the Community Watch Group, a loose coalition of residents who coordinated package theft alerts and kept an eye on suspicious cars. I did not know him well, but I had seen him at a few HOA meetings, and he seemed like the kind of person who asked uncomfortable questions. I sent him a direct message explaining what had happened and asking if he knew anything about the missing cash box. He replied within 5 minutes. "Yeah, Tracy has been on a tear lately. She accused my neighbor of stealing a folding chair from the pool deck last month. Turned out the chair was in the storage closet the whole time, but she never apologized. If you need help, let me know. I am tired of her garbage." I thanked him and said I would keep him posted. Then I walked back to my unit, mentally sorting through what I knew. Tracy claimed she had filed a complaint and submitted evidence, but nothing existed in the portal. Angela said the complaint was marked resolved and archived, which made no sense if I was still being charged. The camera footage existed, but I could not access it. And Tracy was the only person with direct control over both the footage and the incident reporting system. It was a perfect setup. She could delete, edit, or hide anything she wanted, and by the time anyone noticed, the damage was done. That night I could not sleep. I kept running through scenarios, trying to figure out Tracy's angle. If she had stolen the cash box herself, why frame me? We barely interacted. I had never challenged her directly, never filed a complaint against her, never made myself a target. Unless that was the point. Maybe I was random. Maybe she needed a fall guy and I happened to be convenient. Or maybe she had been stealing from the HOA for months and was setting up a pattern of blaming residents to cover her tracks. The more I thought about it, the more sense it made. Tracy had access to everything. Gate logs, camera footage, incident reports, vendor invoices, petty cash receipts. If she wanted to skim a little here and there, she could, and no one would notice, because she was the one who controlled the records. The next morning I got the email Tracy had promised. It was time-stamped at 6:43, which meant she had sent it before most people were even awake. The subject line was formal notice, restitution and access suspension, and the body was 2 paragraphs of bureaucratic threats wrapped in fake politeness. It said I had been identified as a person of interest in the disappearance of HOA property, that I had failed to provide a satisfactory explanation, and that unless I submitted payment and a written apology within 72 hours, my amenities access would be suspended and the matter would be referred to collections. There was no attachment, no evidence, no witness statement, nothing. Just Tracy's word, backed by nothing, delivered like a legal verdict. I forwarded the email to Greg and asked if this was normal. He replied immediately, "No. This is retaliation disguised as enforcement. She did the same thing to another guy last year." He fought it and eventually got the charge dropped, but it took 3 months, and he had to hire a lawyer. Save everything. I mean everything. I told him I already was, and he said good, because Tracy had a habit of changing her story once people started pushing back. I decided to go to the management office in person. The office was open from 9 to 5 on weekdays, but there was a walk-in cutoff at 4:30, and if you missed it, you were out of luck until the next day. It was Tuesday morning, just past 9, and I figured I could catch the manager before things got busy. I drove over, parked in the visitor lot, and walked in. The office was small, just a reception desk and 2 back offices, and Angela was at the desk again, looking like she had not slept. I asked if the manager was available, and she said he was on a call but should be free in about 10 minutes. I said I would wait. The lobby had a bulletin board covered in notices, most of them printed on the same cream-colored paper with the HOA logo at the top. I scanned them while I waited. Pool rules. Trash pickup schedule. Reminder about holiday decorations. A flyer for an upcoming board meeting. And then, tucked in the bottom corner, a notice about updated security protocols. It was dated 2 weeks earlier and signed by Tracy Benson. The notice said that all security footage requests must now be submitted in writing to the security liaison for review and approval, and that requests would be processed within 14 business days. It was a new rule, quietly added, designed to make sure Tracy stayed in control of the one thing that could prove or disprove her accusations. The manager finally came out. His name was Paul Driscoll, mid-50s, gray hair, permanent expression of mild irritation. He shook my hand and led me into his office, a cramped space with a desk, 2 chairs, and a filing cabinet that looked like it had survived a flood. I sat down and explained the situation. I told him about the missing cash box, the accusation, the charge in my account, the missing complaint file, and Tracy's refusal to provide any evidence. Paul listened, nodding occasionally, and when I finished, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. He said Tracy had been very aggressive with enforcement lately, and that he had received a few complaints, but that she was technically within her authority as liaison. I asked what that meant, and he said it meant she could file complaints and recommend actions, and unless the board overruled her, the actions stood. I asked if I could see the archived complaint. Paul hesitated, then said he would look, but he could not make any promises. He turned to his computer and started typing, squinting at the screen. After a minute he frowned and said the complaint had been filed, reviewed, and marked resolved, all within a 3-hour window. He said that was unusual but not technically against policy. I asked who had marked it resolved, and he said the system showed Tracy as both the filer and the resolver, which should not have been possible, but the software allowed it if you had admin access. I asked if that meant Tracy could file a complaint, charge me, and then close the complaint without anyone else reviewing it, and Paul said yes, technically, if she used her liaison access. I felt my stomach drop. This was not just a scam. It was a fully operational system designed to let Tracy do whatever she wanted with zero oversight. I asked Paul if he could pull the security footage from the clubhouse lobby, and he said he did not have access to that. Only Tracy did. I asked if he could request it on my behalf, and he said he could try, but it would take time, and Tracy had been known to delay or deny requests if she felt they were not justified. I asked what counted as justified, and Paul just shrugged. He said the board had given her broad discretion, and unless someone filed a formal complaint against her, there was not much he could do. I left the office feeling worse than when I arrived. Tracy had built herself a fortress, and every door I tried to open just led to another locked room. I sat in my car for a minute trying to think. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from Greg. "Can you meet me at the clubhouse in 20 minutes? I think I found something." I replied yes and started driving. Greg was waiting outside when I arrived, leaning against the brick wall near the entrance, arms crossed. He was maybe 60, gray beard, flannel shirt, the kind of guy who looked like he had been dealing with HOA nonsense since before HOAs were even a thing. He nodded when he saw me and said, "Follow me." We went inside and he led me straight to the charity table. He pointed at the stack of identical envelopes and said, "These showed up yesterday. Angela told me Tracy brought them in herself and put them on the table." I asked what was in them, and Greg said he did not know, but he thought it was weird that they were all identical and all sealed. He said it looked like Tracy was staging something, setting up a scene to make it look like the charity drive was still active, even though the cash box was gone. I picked up one of the envelopes and held it up to the light. I could see the outline of a folded piece of paper inside, but no details. Greg said he had checked the clubhouse a few days earlier, right after the cash box disappeared, and the table had been completely empty. No envelopes, no sign, nothing. Then Tracy had swooped in, put the envelopes out, and sent her vague Facebook post. Greg said it felt like she was trying to control the narrative, making it look like she was still running a charity drive while quietly accusing people of theft behind the scenes. I set the envelope back down and asked Greg what he thought was really going on. He said he had been tracking Tracy's behavior for months, ever since she took the liaison job, and he had noticed a pattern. Small things would go missing: petty cash from the office, a case of bottled water from the gym, a box of light bulbs from the maintenance closet, and then Tracy would launch an investigation that went nowhere. She would accuse someone, file a vague report, and then the whole thing would quietly disappear. Greg said he thought she was stealing and using the investigations as cover. If anyone got too close, she would just blame a resident and move on. I asked if he had proof, and he said not yet, but he was working on it. He said he had been collecting gate fob logs, matching them against the times when items went missing, and he had noticed something interesting. On at least 3 occasions, the only person with access to the clubhouse during the missing item window was Tracy herself. No residents, no staff, just her. I asked if he could get me a copy of those logs, and he said he would try, but the logs were technically controlled by the gate vendor, and Tracy was the point of contact. It was another locked door. We stood there for a minute, both of us staring at the empty table, and then Greg said, "You need to get that security footage. That is the smoking gun. If Tracy took the cash box, the camera caught it. And if she deleted the footage, that is evidence of tampering. Either way, you have her." I asked how I was supposed to get footage that Tracy controlled, and Greg said, "We force her hand. File a police report. If you report a theft and name the HOA as the custodian of the evidence, the police can request the footage directly, and Tracy will have to turn it over or explain why she cannot." I had not thought of that. I asked if it would actually work, and Greg said it should, as long as I framed the report correctly. I could not report that I stole something, obviously, but I could report that I was being accused of theft without evidence, and that I believed the accusation was false and possibly part of a larger pattern of misconduct. That would put the police in the middle, and once they were involved, Tracy would have to cooperate or risk obstruction charges. It was risky, because if Tracy had somehow planted fake evidence, the police might believe her, but it was better than sitting around and waiting for the suspension to hit. I thanked Greg and said I would think about it. He said, "Do not think too long, you have 72 hours, and then he left. I stayed in the clubhouse for another few minutes, looking around, trying to see the place the way Tracy saw it. She had access to everything. The gate logs, the camera feeds, the mail room, the storage closets, the petty cash drawer in the office. She could walk in any time. take what she wanted, and then pin it on whoever was convenient. And because she controlled the evidence, no one could prove otherwise. It was a perfect crime, except she had gotten greedy. She had picked the wrong target, or maybe just picked one too many. And now people were starting to notice. I went home and spent the rest of the day putting together a timeline. I opened a spreadsheet and started listing every interaction I had had with Tracy, every email, every notice, every vague threat. I added dates, times, and whatever context I could remember. Then I added the missing cash box incident, the charge in my account, the email this morning, and the conversation with Paul. I also added Greg's observations about the other missing items and the gate log gaps. When I was done, I had a document that was 3 pages long and painted a pretty clear picture. Tracy was running a scam, and I was just the latest victim. That night, I got another email from Tracy. This one was even shorter. Final reminder. Payment is due within 48 hours. Failure to comply will result in immediate suspension and referral to collections. No room for negotiation. I stared at the screen and felt the anger build. She was not even pretending to be reasonable anymore. It was pure intimidation, the kind of move you make when you know no one can stop you. I replied with a single line. I am requesting a copy of the incident report and any supporting evidence before I respond further. I sent it and waited. 10 minutes later, Tracy replied. All evidence has been submitted and reviewed. Your request is noted, but does not change your obligation to resolve this matter. I replied again. Where was the evidence submitted? I do not see anything in the portal. She did not reply. If you are enjoying this insane HOA nightmare, hit the like button and subscribe for more real stories of petty tyrants getting exactly what they deserve. I called Greg and told him I was going to file a police report. He said good, and that he would come with me if I wanted a witness. I said yes, and we agreed to meet at the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department substation the next morning. I did not sleep that night either. I kept imagining Tracy's face when the police showed up asking for the footage. I kept imagining the moment when she realized she could not delete her way out of this one. The next morning I met Greg in the substation parking lot. We went inside and asked to speak to an officer about filing a report. The desk officer, a younger guy with a shaved head and a bored expression, asked what the issue was, and I explained the situation as calmly as I could. I said I was being accused of theft by my HOA without evidence, that the accuser controlled the security footage, and that I believed the accusation was false and possibly part of a pattern. The officer listened, took notes, and then said he would need to talk to his supervisor. We waited 20 minutes. The supervisor came out, an older woman with sergeant's stripes, and she asked me to go through it again. I did. Slower this time, emphasizing the missing evidence, the locked portal complaint, and Tracy's control over the footage. The sergeant asked if I had any proof that the accusation was false, and I said I had a timeline, screenshots, and a witness who had observed similar behavior. She looked at Greg, who nodded, and then she said she would open a report and send an officer to the HOA office to request the footage. She said it might take a few days, but once the request was filed, the HOA would have to respond or provide a reason why they could not. We left the station, and I felt a small flicker of hope for the first time in days. Tracy was about to get hit with an official request she could not ignore, and if she refused or deleted the footage, she would be in much bigger trouble than a petty cash theft. Greg said he would keep digging into the gate logs, and I said I would keep documenting everything. We agreed to meet again in 2 days to compare notes. That afternoon I got a call from Paul at the management office. He sounded nervous. He said the police had contacted him requesting security footage from the clubhouse lobby for a specific date range, and that he had forwarded the request to Tracy. He said Tracy had not responded yet, but that he was legally obligated to comply with the police request, so he was going to try to access the footage himself if she did not respond by end of day. I thanked him and hung up. Then I texted Greg. Paul just called. Police request is in. Tracy is on the clock. An hour later, Tracy called me. Her voice was ice. You filed a police report? I said yes. She said, you just made this 1,000 times worse for yourself. I am forwarding your account to collections today, and I am recommending a full audit of your access history. If there is anything else you have done, we will find it. I said, I have done nothing, and you know it. She said, we will see what the police think. Then she hung up. I sat there holding my phone, heart pounding. She was panicking. That call was not confident intimidation, it was desperation dressed up as authority. She knew the police request was going to expose her, and she was trying to bury me in preemptive accusations before that happened. I called Greg and told him what she had said. He laughed, a short bitter sound, and said, she is spiraling. That is good. Keep her off balance. The next day, Paul called again. He said he had accessed the security footage himself after Tracy failed to respond, and that he had sent the relevant clips to the police as requested. He said he had also watched the footage, and that he wanted me to come to his office as soon as possible. I said I would be there in 20 minutes. Greg said he was coming too. Paul was waiting for us in his office, door already open. He looked shaken. He gestured for us to sit down and then turned his monitor so we could see the screen. He pressed play. The footage showed the clubhouse lobby, date and timestamp in the corner, 3 nights earlier, about 8:15 in the evening. The charity table was visible in the frame, the clear acrylic cash box sitting in the middle. For about 30 seconds, nothing happened. Then Tracy walked into the frame from the left, wearing her tan blazer and carrying a shoulder bag. She looked around, walked straight to the table, picked up the cash box, and slipped it into her bag. Then she turned and walked out of frame. The whole thing took maybe 15 seconds. Paul paused the video. He said, that is not all. He scrubbed forward about 10 minutes. Tracy walked back into frame, this time carrying the stack of identical envelopes. She placed them on the table, arranged them neatly, and then pulled out her phone and took a picture. Then she left again. Paul said, she staged the table to make it look like the drive was still active, and then she accused you to cover the theft. I felt everything inside me go cold and hot at the same time. There it was, the smoking gun. Tracy on camera, stealing the cash box, staging the scene, and then turning around and framing me. Greg leaned back in his chair and said, send that to the police right now. Paul said he already had, and that the officer he spoke to said they would be opening a theft investigation and would likely contact Tracy within the next 24 hours. He said he had also notified the HOA board president and that there would be an emergency executive session to discuss Tracy's conduct. I asked Paul if he had checked the other footage, the times when other items went missing. He said he had not had time, but that he would, and that if there was a pattern he would report it. I asked if my charge would be reversed, and he said yes, immediately, and that he would also issue a formal apology on behalf of the management office. I said I wanted it in writing, and he said he would send it by end of day. Greg and I left the office and stood in the parking lot, both of us too wired to get in our cars. Greg said, you did it. You caught her. I said, we caught her. He grinned and said, now we watch her burn. I asked what he thought would happen next, and he said the board would have to remove her from the liaison role, the police would charge her with theft, and if she had stolen other things, she would be looking at multiple counts. He said it would take weeks to play out, but the outcome was not in doubt. Tracy was done. That night I got an email from the board president, a guy named Richard Yost, who I had seen at a few meetings but never spoken to. The email was formal and brief. It said the board had been made aware of serious allegations regarding Tracy Benson, that her access to HOA systems had been suspended pending investigation, and that residents should direct all security-related inquiries to the management office until further notice. The email also said that any residents who had been subject to enforcement actions initiated by Tracy in the past 6 months should contact the board to request a review. It was as close to an admission of guilt as you were going to get from an HOA board. The next morning, I went back to the clubhouse to talk to Angela. She was at the desk, and when she saw me, she actually smiled. A rare event. She said, "I heard. I am so sorry you had to go through that." I said it was not her fault, and she said, "Still. She should have been stopped months ago." I asked if she had seen Tracy since the footage came out, and Angela said no, but that Paul had told her Tracy was no longer allowed on HOA property and that her keycard had been deactivated. I asked if the police had contacted Tracy yet, and Angela said she did not know, but that there were rumors Tracy had lawyered up. I thanked Angela and walked back to the charity table. The stack of identical envelopes was gone. In their place was a handwritten note on a piece of printer paper, no readable text, just the HOA logo and a line that said the charity drive had been suspended pending review. I took a picture of the note and sent it to Greg. He replied, "Told you. She is done." 2 days later, I got a call from a Charlotte, Mecklenburg detective. He introduced himself and said he was handling the theft investigation. He asked if I could come down to the station to give a formal statement, and I said yes. I brought Greg with me again, and we spent about an hour going through everything. The detective said they had already interviewed Tracy, and that she had denied taking the cash box, but that the video evidence was pretty clear. He said they were also looking into other incidents, and that if I had any additional information, now was the time to share it. I told him about the missing water, the light bulbs, the folding chair, and the pattern Greg had noticed with the gate logs. The detective took notes and said he would follow up. A week later, the board sent out another email. This one was longer. It said that after a thorough review, Tracy Benson had been removed from her role as security vendor point of contact, effective immediately. It said that an independent audit of security and financial records was underway, and that the board would be implementing new policies to ensure proper oversight and accountability. The email also said that any residents who had been charged restitution fees or had access suspended as a result of complaints filed by Tracy could request an expedited review and refund. It stopped short of admitting Tracy had stolen anything, but the message was clear. The board knew, and they were trying to clean up the mess before it got worse. I submitted my refund request that afternoon. 2 days later, the charge disappeared from my account, and I received a formal apology letter from the board president. The letter was bland and corporate, but it acknowledged that I had been subjected to unwarranted enforcement and that the board regretted any inconvenience. It also included a prepaid gift card for $50 as a gesture of goodwill, which felt like hush money, but I took it anyway. Greg called me a few days after that and said the detective had told him they found additional evidence. It turned out Tracy had been stealing from the HOA for at least 8 months. They had recovered gate fob logs showing she had accessed the clubhouse and storage areas dozens of times outside of normal hours, always alone. They had also found records of petty cash withdrawals that did not match any legitimate expense reports, all signed off by Tracy herself using her admin access. And they had found the cash box. Tracy had stashed it in her car, still locked, with the money inside. She had planned to return it eventually, after using the theft accusation to pressure me into paying the restitution, which she would then pocket. It was a con within a con, and she had gotten sloppy. The detective said Tracy was being charged with theft, fraud, and abuse of access to computer systems. He said the charges carried potential jail time, but that most likely she would plead out to probation and restitution. He also said the HOA was considering a civil suit to recover damages, but that was out of his hands. The board held a town hall meeting 2 weeks later to address the situation. I did not plan to go, but Greg convinced me. He said the board needed to see that residents were paying attention, and that if we did not show up, they would sweep it under the rug and nothing would change. So I went. The meeting was packed, standing room only, and the tension in the room was thick. Richard Yost, the board president, stood at the front and gave a carefully worded speech about accountability, transparency, and the steps the board was taking to prevent future incidents. He said Tracy Benson was no longer affiliated with the HOA in any capacity, and that the board was working with legal counsel to address the broader issues raised by the investigation. Then he opened the floor for questions. The first person to stand up was a woman I did not recognize. She said she had been charged a $100 fine 6 months ago for a missing pool towel, and that Tracy had told her the towel had been caught on camera being taken from the pool deck, but the footage was never provided. She asked if that charge was going to be reviewed. Richard said yes, and that anyone with similar experiences should submit a formal review request. The next person was a guy who said his car had been threatened with towing because Tracy claimed it was parked in a guest spot overnight, even though he had a resident sticker. He said he paid $50 to avoid the tow, and he wanted his money back. Richard said they would look into it. It went on like that for almost an hour. One by one, people stood up and shared stories of Tracy's tactics. Bogus fines, missing evidence, selective enforcement, threats that never materialized but cost people money and stress anyway. By the end of the meeting, Richard looked exhausted, and the board had promised to review every enforcement action Tracy had initiated in the past year. It was not perfect, but it was something. Greg and I left the meeting and stood outside in the parking lot. He said that was beautiful. I said it was necessary. He asked what I was going to do next, and I said probably nothing. I had my refund, my apology, and my reputation back. That was enough. He said, "Good. But if anything like this happens again, you call me." I said I would. A few weeks later, I ran into Angela at the clubhouse. She said Tracy had moved out of the neighborhood entirely, packed up and left in the middle of the night. No forwarding address, no goodbye, just gone. Angela said she had heard through the rumor mill that Tracy had taken a plea deal and was on probation, but she did not know the details. I said I did not care. As long as she was gone, that was enough. The board eventually implemented new rules. All enforcement actions now required 2 signatures. One from the liaison and one from a board member. All security footage requests had to be processed by the management office, not the liaison. And all financial transactions over $50 required a second approval. It was not a perfect system, but it closed the loopholes Tracy had exploited. The charity drive came back a few months later, this time with a new clear lockbox bolted to the table and a webcam pointed at it 24/7. The donations started rolling in again, and this time, every dollar was accounted for. I still live in Granite Falls, and I still deal with the HOA, but it is different now. People ask questions. People push back, and when someone tries to pull a Tracy Benson, there are a dozen residents ready to shut it down before it starts. Greg still runs the community watch group, and he sends out regular updates reminding people to document everything and never assume the HOA is acting in good faith. Tracy Benson is gone, her reign of petty theft and intimidation is over, and the neighborhood is better for it. The key log review proved only leadership had access during the theft windows. The HOA issued a policy clarification that blocks Karen's favorite tactic, and Karen was ordered to stop contacting residents directly. I got my money back, my access restored, and my dignity intact. And Tracy's phone died mid-rant during one of her final confrontations with another resident, and she just stood there, frozen, unable to finish her threat, which might have been the funniest karma moment of the whole saga. I learned a lot from that fight. I learned that bullies rely on you staying quiet. I learned that documentation is the most powerful weapon you have. And I learned that even when the system is rigged, you can still win if you refuse to back down. Glad you tuned in today.